It was written in September of 1947, 5 days after the formation of the U.S. Air Force, 2 months after Roswell. In the memo, the future chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff couldn't be more clear. UFOs are real, and they're operating in our skies. Let's explore. Hi everyone, and welcome to Project Bluebook, where we explore all things unidentified. I am Thor, and thanks for tuning in. It's been over 70 years since U.S. Air Force General at the time, Nathan Twining, wrote the infamous 3-page memo bluntly stating, quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious," end quote. And it matters today because of the recent disclosures, hearings, and supposed openness regarding investigating UAPs before the public. The fact is that even today, those leading the efforts are unable to state it as bluntly as he did, and no one of his rank speaks to the matter of unexplained phenomena at all. This is why his memo matters still today. Leading Allied bomb raids over Germany during World War II, in 1945 he became the commanding general of the military's Air Materiel Command, working with the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, then still divided and simply called the Wright Airfield, but was the headquarters of reverse engineering of Axis aircraft and military technology captured from Germany, Japan, and Italy during the war. This is why the Wright-Patterson ATI, when the bases combined under Air Force Command and in the hands of Nathan Twining, was ultimately renamed Foreign Technology Division, tasked with studying and reverse engineering any technology captured from the enemy. This is why it became the natural destination for the Roswell debris following 2 alien crashes in early July 1947. And there is ample evidence this did take place, and that Nathan Twining was aware of it. The memo was written on September 23rd, mere 5 days after the U.S. Air Force establishment as a separate branch of the U.S. military. UFO research has lived with the Air Force since day one. Twining was asked to write this high-level assessment memo to Brigadier General George Shulgin, Chief of the Air Intelligence Requirements Division at the Pentagon, and as we will see when reading the memo, Twining held back what he knew, even as he unequivocally stated his considered opinion that UFOs are indeed real material objects flying in our skies, capable of feats no human technology on Earth, allied or adversary, is known to do. Those feats included, quoting from the memo directly, the reported operating characteristics such as extreme rates of climb, maneuverability, particularly in roll, and action which must be considered evasive when sighted, lend belief to the possibility that some of the objects are controlled either manually, automatically, or remotely. End quote. He went on to describe additional characteristics: their silence, metallic shine, leaving no trail, circular or elliptical shape, without signs of propulsion or exhaustion, dome shade on top, flat on the bottom. Very specific. We also know Twining's whereabouts on July 8, 1947, the day the Roswell Daily Record declared they had a flying saucer. Twining canceled a scheduled trip to the West Coast, quote, due to a very important and sudden matter, end quote. This exists in military communication records. People thought he was going to Washington, but instead his travel records show he made a trip to New Mexico on board a U.S. Army Air Force aircraft, where he remained until July 10th, when the whole debris field had been cleaned up and flown first to Fort Worth, Texas, under the command of General Ramey, from where it was later flown to Wright-Patterson Foreign Technology Division for study, because a UFO of extraterrestrial origin is for sure foreign technology. We also have evidence that the bodies, while ultimately residing at Wright-Patterson, were first flown to Washington, D.C. for autopsy and analysis of bone structure, tissue structure, organ analysis, a topic for another episode. Twining was provably there in Roswell when the matter was cleaned up. 2 months later, he wrote the memo at the behest of the Pentagon with his team at Air Material Command, including the top secret personnel at the Air Institute of Technology Intelligence, or T2, the division that was soon to become busy reverse engineering alien aircraft, and for that purpose changed their name to the Foreign Technology Division. Let's remember, these were not optical analysts, lights in the sky, or eyewitness testimony collectors. These were high-tech aeronautical and aerospace hardware engineers and scientists. The exact right profiles you would need if you did indeed have alien hardware on your hands. Great cover indeed, as it fit perfectly into the early days of the Cold War and nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR. Nathan Twining gave the top rank at the Pentagon an unwavering, clean, short, and full assessment of the flying disc business as requested. And his assessment was, they are real, they're material, and they're not man-made. Bryce Zabel wrote for themedium.com on this topic, and for disclosure, this podcast relies on him as a source along with others. Zabel points out a less-known detail that at the end of the memo, handwritten, Twining listed the high-ranking officers and scientists who coordinated the memo. For the record, these were people from propeller, power plant, and aircraft labs of the Army Air Force, in addition to the engineering division, T2 and T3 at Wright Airfield. In other words, Twining made sure Pentagon understood his assessment had ample support from the entire engineering branches of the Army Air Force. The 3-page memo is visually embedded into this podcast, and I highly recommend you guys pause and read the entire thing at some point. It's very thorough and very intentionally written for the opinion to be understood as beyond the shadow of a doubt. The third paragraph gives the recommendation that, quote, Headquarters Army Air Force issue a directive assigning a priority security classification and code name for a detailed study of this matter, end quote. This would include the Army, Navy, the newly formed Air Force, the Atomic Energy Commission, the JRDB, the Air Force Scientific Civil Advisory Group, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the RAND Group, and NEPA projects for comments and recommendations. And many of these recommendations would soon go forward, increasingly secretive and ultimately hidden and compartmentalized within the military-industrial complex, and from the eyes of the public and its leaders following assessments of damage should this knowledge become known, including, based on the Robertson Panel of 1954, the Brookings Institute Report of 1960, as well as the 1,458-page Condon Committee Report in 1967, where 25% of cases belonging to Project Bluebook remained unexplained. The skeptics point to paragraph H2 that states, in the memo written to Brigadier General George Shulgin, that would be classified for 30 years, stating, quote, consideration must be given to the lack of physical evidence in the shape of crash recovered exhibits which would undeniably prove the existence of these objects, end quote. This is exactly where time affords perspective and big picture understanding, because it's likely that Brigadier General George Shulgin had already been briefed on the crash and the retrieval effort between July 8th and September 23rd. So Twining, understanding the need for secrecy, wrote the memo with plausible deniability in mind and built in that while it stated everything it needed to state, also omitted what it did not need to state, even as it spoke to it directly, the presence of physical evidence. This simply demonstrates that a strategy of secrecy had already been implemented, as we also know from General Ramey in Roswell with the weather balloon cover story, not to speak of subsequent threats made to locals in Roswell by an intelligence PSYOPs person named Army Air Force officer Hunter G. Penn, who blew the whistle of his psyops before passing away. He was to ensure information blackout, tasked with finding, questioning, and intimidating all civil witnesses into absolute silence regarding the Roswell crash. Fear and threats and intimidation were his tools. We know this for a fact. This is exactly what happened, from himself and from his intimidated subjects. We also know for a fact Twining traveled to Roswell between July 8 and 10, 1947. We know for a fact crash debris was retrieved those days and flown to Wright-Patterson, Twining's domain, by way of Ramey's Fort Worth airfield. We know plenty of eyewitnesses to the bodies in Washington, the debris at Wright-Patterson, and the retrieval effort in Roswell. We know for a fact that data regarding unexplained phenomena was moved from Washington to Wright-Patterson in the early 50s, including the frozen bodies, all 10 of them, and one living survivor who passed 5 years later in 1952 from 2 distinct Roswell crashes. They were moved to Hangar 23, buildings 18A through 18G, according to a fascinating research performed by Thomas J. Carey and Donald R. Schmidt, thoroughly supported by eyewitness testimony and whistleblower accounts, to piece together a puzzle of how quickly the whole matter became shrouded in secrecy and how fear, humanity's strongest emotion, was to be used to maintain control and secrecy over the whole matter, a topic for another episode. And what was the reception of the memo at the Pentagon and in Washington, D.C.? Well, Nathan Twining became the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force in 1953, where he served until he was promoted to become the first Air Force General to take the chairmanship at the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1957, where he served as a key advisor to President Eisenhower until 1960. So you see, Nathan Twining, who wrote the memo that UFOs are real 70 years ago, served out a distinguished career at the top level, never considered crazy at all. My point is, we litigated this at the top level of the U.S. Armed Forces 70 years ago. Let's move forward from there. You can watch and listen to this and other podcasts on Project Bluebook, where we explore all things unidentified. Each day, let's practice compassion and kindness. And please subscribe. I am Thor, and thanks for tuning in. See you next time.